Hello and welcome to my channel Inch by Inch Art. Today I'm going to be showing you how I made a dragon sculpture out of Super Sculpey. First, I use aluminum foil to make an armature on the inside for the belly. I condition it with my hands and then put it through my pasta maker and roll it out into flat sheets. I then coat the armature with a thin sheet of Super Sculpey. I use my cutting mat to just press the bottom of the belly ball flat and give it a little bit of shape. Then I take another aluminum ball and make an armature for the head, and I do the same thing, coating it with a thin sheet of Super Sculpey. I use my fingers a lot for tools because I find it really easy to mold and shape with my fingers because Super Sculpey is pretty soft. I made the neck just out of a piece of Super Sculpey, and here I am blending it into the body with my fingers. Checking the position of the head and removing excess clay so that the neck fits the head well. Once I've got the head smoothed on with my fingers, I use a silicone sculpting tool to press in the head a little bit more and give a bit of clear definition between the skull and the neck. I then use my silicone sculpting tool to add details, pressing them in and pushing the clay around. The metal dotting tool on the other end of my silicone sculpting tool works great for pressing in certain details like where the eye will go, and sometimes I use it for nostrils and parts of mouths. I use my angled silicone sculpting tool to press in the mouth here. Now that the detail on the face is done and the head is connected to the body, I move on to the rest of the body parts, including the legs. These two discs of clay I'm going to be using as the thighs. I press them on and smooth them out into the body. This was one of the most satisfying parts of this sculpture, creating the tail and adding it on. I rolled out a large worm of clay that was fatter on one end and thinner on the other, and then I pressed it onto the body and smoothed on the connection with my finger. Once I have it completely secured on with pressing firmly with my fingers and using the sculpting tool, I move on to actually shaping the tail itself. I smooth it out well with my fingers, making a little bit of an arch at the top, and then I slowly move along the tail from the base to the tip, stretching and pulling, and removing the excess at the very end. This gave it a really good transition in size from thick and fat at the bottom to thin and pointed at the end. You'll notice I keep wiggling the sculpture on my cutting mat repeatedly in different stages. This is just to make sure that the bottom is flat and secure. Here you can see the foot that I've made. Here's the steps for actually making it. I used 3 worms of clay that are quite chubby. a little bit fatter on one end than the other, and I push them together and use my sculpting tool to blend them a little bit and press them so that they're secured one against the other. Then I use the pointed end of my sculpting tool to press in the holes where the claws will go. I use my angled sculpting tool to press in some wrinkles and make it look clearly separated between where the toes and claws come out and where the long parts of the toes are. I use small pieces of clay rolled into cones that I curl a little bit to make into claws. I then put them into the holes that I've made in the toes and press them in with my sculpting tool. Once I have the claws in place, I use the metal ball tool on the end of my sculpting tool to make little dot impressions as scales. A few last adjustments with my sculpting tool to press them in so they're secure, and my feet are ready. Next I move on to the arms. I decided I wanted this piece to have kind of like T-Rex arms. It's meant to be a little derpy. He's overweight and very basic shaped, not a really scary dragon, but I was going for a particular style, I guess. So I make the basic shape and position that I want for the arms, and then I add the fingers. I roll out 3 worms of clay and then just press them on the ends using my silicone sculpting tool to make sure that they're well blended. Then, the same as I did with the toes, I press in holes and make little cones of clay and put them in as the claws, making sure that they curl at the ends. I'm then able to just put them on the sides of the sculpture and press and blend the base of the arms into the torso. Now that the arms are done, I can move on to the wings. I'm just using a worm of clay and adjusting it to see if I like the size. Again, this isn't supposed to be a dragon that can fly or overly realistic, so I went for some interesting dimensions and shapes on it. So the wings are fairly small compared to the size of the sculpture. Once I've made the structure for the wings, I move on to using a sheet of Sculpey that's been rolled through my pasta machine so that it's a good even thickness. I put the main structure of the wings onto the sheet, and then I use a metal sculpting tool to cut out around how I want the webbing of the wings to be. I then use my fingers to press everything together and give it a bit of a tapering on the end. Once my wings are done being sculpted, I press them into the main torso as well, just behind the arms. Because of the way I made the feet, I decided that just for a little bit extra hold, I would use Sculpey Bacon Bond. So I'm putting a bit of that on the base of the thighs, where I'm going to be adding the feet. I was just worried that I wouldn't be able to press it on as well because of the way I made the feet with the separate pieces pressed together, and that I wouldn't be able to really push it securely on without doing damage to the details on the feet. So that's why I decided using the Sculpey Bacon Bond and adding clay on top that I pressed in would probably be the safest way to go about it. The worst is when you make something, add a lot of detail, and then try to press it onto your piece and end up completely destroying your detail. Here I'm showing how I rolled out little cones of clay that I'm going to use for details and making spikes all over the dragon. using my dotting tool on the end of my sculpting tool to put in more scale indents. Here's a Sculpey ball that I had pre-baked to use for eyes. I like to have eyes that are already hard and made of, doesn't really matter what material, it depends on if you're baking or not, but I like to have eyes that are already hardened because you can press them into the face and you can mold more easily around them without worrying about crushing the round eye itself. I use my silicone sculpting tool to press in the details around the eye and give it an eyelid. Here I've just used some yellow, orange, and red clay and made sort of a fire cane that I then roll out and twist. I know that I want this dragon to be blackish gray, kind of like smoke, with a lot of fiery details. So I decided that I would make the horns this fire twisting color, and then I would paint all the spikes like fire as well. Just securing the horns on with Super Sculpey around the base to both make it look realistic like it's growing out of the head and also make sure that they're really well secure in the head. I also pre-baked these just like I did with the eyes to make it easier to manipulate them and press them in. Here I am just using the dotting tool to add scales all over. I do have other tools for using scales, but I just decided that I wanted to use this particular texture. And I use my angled silicone sculpting tool to put plate indentations on the belly. Adding more spikes all down the back and on the tail. And just pressing in a few more little details around the mouth. Now that it's all baked, I can move on to painting. As I said before, I wanted this to be kind of fire and smoke sort of dragon, so I didn't go heavy with the black. This is actually more of a wash because I do like the translucent quality to this Super Sculpey clay. I know that if I do a light coat of paint watered down, that the translucent clay will show through and it gives it a very different kind of look that has worked really well in the past, but honestly I'm not sure if I like how this came out. Here I am just painting all the spikes like I mentioned before. I wanted it to have aspects of fire on it. So all of these spike textures that I had done previously, I paint yellow. I think I did 3 coats of yellow. And then I do a light red on the tips. And then on the very end of the tips, I do a dark like blood red. I use a color shift red paint that's a metallic sheen for the eyes on the outside, and then I put a little bit of black acrylic paint on the end of this dotting tool so that I can get a really fine pupil. I decided since he's a dragon, I just like the idea of him having a golden belly. So I have this gold enamel paint that's really shiny that I used all over his belly and throat. For the inside webbing of his wings, just to do a different color, I decided to go with the dark red that I used on the tips of the spikes. And now my final step is a really thinned out black wash that I'm putting over all of the details. I want it to look like he's smoking, and I want it to look like the flames are causing the smoke. Well, flame spikes are causing the smoke. You know what I'm saying. So I go over the whole thing with a very watered down black wash. And here's the finished product. I think he came out pretty cool. I do kind of want to go back with another black wash and add a bit more black to it. I like how the black looks on the face. I think it came out great with how the black is sunken into all of the little pit scales, but it didn't do this evenly over the whole body, so I might go back and do a bit on his legs again. He's both cute and fierce. That's it from me. If you liked this and you want to see more of my art, please like, follow, and subscribe.